All right. Hello. Um, on a snowy Monday here in Northwest Ohio, I am, as you can kind of see here, you might be able to tell, I'm actually recording this from my bed. I've got a house full of kids and house guests, so this was the one room where I could get a little peace and quiet to be able to get this material out to you today. So let's talk about chapter 3 and our our work with strategic planning and staffing from the text this week. I thought this was a really interesting chapter and one that um, brought some nice things to light, and certainly some things that I would share from my experiences in talking and looking at this as well. So um, one of the things that they bring up early is kind of this notion of why should we have a strategic plan in relation to the HR functions of the district. And they talk about kind of this idea that there's missed opportunities where you could have a direction that you could move in, and if you aren't planning for that, you're not looking for that. Misalignment with the school needs, to times in which there's new you have certain shortages or overages in staff. If you're not paying attention to what's coming down the pike in terms of, say, future graduation requirements, you could find yourself a situation where you're short science teachers or short math teachers, and that would be a problem for you because you haven't planned to make sure you're in position for the next thing that's coming up. And then some poor human resource structures, with with the kind of the way in which a lot of schools diversify who's in charge of elements of the HR, we miss out on some of the structures if we're not planning well. Our if let's just say you're doing some things right in your HR function where you're exit interviewing people that are leaving, and one of the things that you're hearing is we never felt like we knew exactly what our job was when we got here. Well, that says we've got an issue with some of the structures, and so we need to be strategic in our planning to make sure that from the time someone applies for a job through the time they leave, that we've met what they've needed all along the way. And that includes, again, all personnel, certified as well as classified staff within the district. And so it's important for us to pay attention to those things and think about those kinds of things. And strategic planning should help us in that realm. So the other thing that I thought was important here was noting the people that should be involved in this process, right? And so one of the things that was noted was the fact that generally when we have a school district under 5,000 students, across the board 5,000 students, we see the HR functions become kind of dispersed, right? So building principals take care of a lot of the hiring of teachers in their schools, and have a lot of say and a lot of control over that whole process. The cafeteria manager or the food service director maybe at the central office is overseeing some of those kinds of elements. Facilities person is handling maintenance and custodial and those types of things, but we're not seeing this kind of idea of who, this kind of centralizing of those services until we get to about 5,000 students or so. So that becomes an interesting kind of notion to think about who you should be involving in making this plan. If it's diverse and dispersed in that way, you need to make sure you're including this. And then the text also made the point that I thought was really important, that this has to be administrative and board. The board has to be a part of the plan in terms of helping set some targets or some policies towards targets. And then also that way, because they've been involved, when you come with staffing increases to them, you'll see more, you'll get better results from them, I think. I actually worked for a board. I was actually hired by a board who had established some particular kinds of staffing metrics. Again, and I mentioned those, and as a high school administrator, I was told right away that our goal metric was 25 students for every teacher, and how we defined that had been laid out, um, and what that meant, um, and why that was important. Now, along my tenure there, we also had a conversation about what's a metric for a growing high school in terms of guidance staff. Right? How many, when do we go from 3 guidance counselors to 4? When do we make that transition? And those were important conversations to have, and those were both administratively and starting to establish some protocols at the board level from kind of an upper policy kind of realm. And so it's important that we have kind of that boots on the ground implementers, but we also have policy to help back us up, so that when we decide to not to replace a custodian, it can be because we have a staffing policy that says we will hire this many custodians, or a custodian per this many square feet, and after this many custodians are hired, there's a supervisor, right? So, this allows for us to have these kinds of discussions and to map out the way those things ought to play out. So the majority of the chapter obviously then was looking at the elements of this strategic planning process, and that's figure 3.2. That's on page 67 of your text, and there's 7 phases, and I think a few of them were of interest. So let's just kind of run down through the list, and then we'll wrap this up. So phase 1 was analyzing enrollment trends, and they pointed out some kinds of different enrollment trends that you needed to pay attention to, where they were getting some parent surveying showing that as kids were getting older, some parents were choosing not to pay for tuitions to the parochial schools. So enrollments had been lower in the elementary grades, and now they're starting to spike up in the middle school, which means we have maybe larger 7th and 8th grade classes, which are going to really translate to larger high school classes down the road, right? So we have to think about those enrollment trends. We talked about that last week, and here it is again as a really important thing for us to think about. Then we look at the kind of current staffing deployments in phase 2. Who do we have? Where are they? And again, maybe we do this in different ways, where we can talk about teachers, but maybe we're talking about teachers that are certified in particular ways. We may see a curricular plan be developed at the high school that then is going to result in some staffing needs that we need to address, because we want to increase advanced placement courses that are offered. And so how do we get those to happen? What do we need? And if we are adding a course, well, there's maybe in the first year or two, only a section or 2 additional added to the master schedule. Well, what does that mean? Can we get away with larger classes in the other spaces? How do we translate that? How does that work, right? So looking at current staffing trends, and then that means current staffing ratios. As I said, I was hired into be a high school administrator where 25-1 was our goal ratio. And we weren't there completely, but we worked to get there. And over my time there, we actually did get there. So if we look at the current ratios, then we can just start talking about what we want, right? In phase 4, determining the desired layers. And then phase 5, providing staffing projections. So again, if I see that my enrollment is increasing, I'm going to project that I need to hire some more staff, and at what increments I should be able to make that kind of plan. That if I'm adding 100 students to my building, I would expect that I would need that's 100 more math classes, 100 more students taking math. Well, that may be one teacher, or maybe maybe that's a part-time position in year one, or maybe we suck it up in year one to fire a full-time in year two, so that we have the need, the full need. And we talk about that in those kinds of regards, right? So if I have a declining, but also how do I handle a declining enrollment? If I have a declining enrollment in elementary school, can I see whether I've got a retirement coming? And can I withstand the inefficiencies until that retirement occurs, and then know that we're not going to replace that, and bring our staffing more in line with the ratios that it needs to have. Um, Designing compliance mechanisms is phase 6. This idea that we again are putting in some checks and balances. Monitoring and feedback is phase 7. So how are we doing each staffing cycle? What does that look like? How does that happen? What's going on with those things? And again, some of that strategic planning it could be around HR structure. So maybe we've had a lot of turnover in custodians, and we have reconfigured and said, well, one of the reasons we have a turnover issue is because of a staffing ratio issue. We're asking people to clean too many square feet, but also we're not providing the kind of training that they need to have in order to do their job well and be efficient. So we put in some HR processes for trainings and follow up on those trainings, and we increased our total number of custodians to help reduce square footage per person. The facilities person, because we're under 5,000 students total, it has to make a reporting on those things, and then we're monitoring and providing feedback. So they're reporting. We've increased custodians. Our turnover rate has decreased. That seems to have been effective. This is now the metric that we're going to use for square footage, and we're going to continue to monitor to see that we continue to meet that goal. Excuse me. So there is chapter 3 really in a nutshell. I thought it was an interesting chapter, and we will see you out on the discussion board. All right.